Our Father, we're very thankful for the opportunity you've given us to study your word. Be with Rex as he directs us in this study. Let us glean the message you would have us to learn from your people as they travel from Egypt to their homeland. We pray, God, that we might learn about you, how you react to the people that you are guiding. Help us, Father, to glorify you in every way. Forgive us of our sins. And it's through Jesus we pray.
Amen. Okay, we are beginning in chapter 32. We will conclude this study, anyway, in the book of Numbers tonight. For next week, you need to read the first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy for Kevin's class. Actually, he'd like you to read the whole book, but for the class specifically, the first 4 chapters. Okay, so we start in chapter 32, and we actually only have about 2 or 3.5 chapters to look at tonight, because much of 36 we're going to ignore because we've already been through it in chapter 27. So we see in 32, we see the settlement of the Transjordan tribes. What 3 tribes were the Transjordan tribes? First one was the oldest son.
Reuben, Dan, half tribe of Manasseh.
Reuben and who?
Wasn't Dan.
Wasn't Dan.
Yeah.
But it was another tribe that lived up near him.
Yeah.
Or that lived up in that general direction, okay? Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, okay? And why did they want to stay on that side? Verse 1 tells you. Now the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad had an exceedingly large number of livestock. So when they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and the land of Gilead was made up of 2 former Amorite provinces of kings that they killed before they got to where they are in the plains of Moab, and those were, one of the Amorite kings had a 2-letter name, Og, and the other one was Sihon. Okay, those were the 2 kings, and they had land in the Transjordan. Now, when we're talking about Transjordan, what are we talking about?
East side of Jordan.
East side of the Jordan. Okay, from the east side of the Jordan to what? Well, it was all desert, it was all plains, okay, but it went up to the mountains. You know, it was in 1966? 1966, the Syrians and the Israelis fought over what? The Golan Heights. Okay, that's part of that area. Okay, that's where it was. It wasn't down in the valley. It was, as you go east, the land once again goes up. Okay, and so that's the area that we're talking about. Trans, of course, means across. So it's across the Jordan from the Promised Land. So whenever you see this term Transjordan, that's what they're talking about. It's on the east side of the Jordan River, and it generally ran up to the mountains or the foothills that were over there. And that's the area that they're talking about. And again, the reason that they made the request that they're about to make, okay, that they do make, is because they had this large number of livestock, and this was a great area in which to raise livestock, okay? If you look at verses 2 through 5, okay, immediately who balks at this request? Who's leading them? That's not a leading question. It's the same guy that's been leading them Moses is leading them. Okay, Moses is still there. Joshua hasn't taken over yet. They're not in the Promised Land yet. Okay, they are east of the Promised Land in the plains of Moab. Okay, and so you see in verse 2 where I am. Let's go to verse 4. The land which the Lord conquered before the congregation of Israel, that is the land Transjordan, that's on the east side of Jordan, where they kicked out the Amorites, okay, is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock. They said, if we, they're speaking to Moses, okay, that's who they're addressing. If we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. So they're saying, give us the land that's in the Jordan, okay? And immediately Moses sees a problem, okay? Verse 6, but Moses said to the sons of Gad and to the sons of Reuben, shall your brothers go to war while you yourselves sit here? What's he telling them? Yeah, who's supposed to go in and take the land? Who did God designate to go in and take the promised land? All of them, all 12 tribes. Okay, all 12 tribes. And so that's the question that comes up. And Moses' comment in verse 7, now why are you discouraging the sons of Israel from crossing into the land which God has given them? Well, who's he about to use as an example? I'm sorry?
The spies.
Okay. He's talking about what happened before with this group of people. Where did they send spies?
On the other side, on the west side of the Jordan.
Okay, but they sent spies into the land of Canaan. God got them to Kadesh, okay? God told them, go in and take the land. The spies were sent. The spies came back and said, oh, they have giants that live in the land. Yeah, there's a lot of food there. It's really lush, but there are giants in the land, and they have these big cities. Okay, who had told them already that the cities were going to be theirs? God told them that. God told all the things that are there are going to belong to who? To Israel. They're going to be given to Israel by God. Okay, and in the book of, I think it's the book of, yes, it is the book of Hebrews. What was the problem that Israel had at that point in time? What were they lacking in? They were lacking in faith. Okay? They were lacking in faith. They were unbelieving. They didn't believe that God was going to come through with this. Now, God had only taken care of them for 40 years in the wilderness, had walked them through the Red Sea, had done all these miracles for them, and all of a sudden, they lose faith in God, that God's not going to come through like he said he would. Well, we know that's not true, but from time to time, all of us have our faith shaken by something that happens in this physical world. And we just need to remember to be strengthened. So, then the sons of Gad, in verse 2, the sons of Gad and Reuben came and spoke to Moses and to Eleazar the priest and to the leaders of the congregation, saying, okay, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan, because we've got all this livestock. So this problem that they see is that God's going, they are thinking, or they are interpreting based on what God did when the spies came back and didn't give a good report, and how Israel reacted, that God is not going to accept this proposition from the children of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Now, has Moses at this point in time talked to God and asked him? No, he is not. Okay, is he going to? Yes, he will. Okay, but he hasn't at this point in time. So he makes some assumptions, and these other leaders make some assumptions that they're going to get all of Israel in trouble because they're balking about doing what? Going in and fighting for the land. Okay. Their land has already been won. They've made the proposition that we're going to build corrals or whatever it is for our cattle, for our animals. We're going to rebuild the cities however we have to. We're going to build houses, whatever we have to do for our wives and our little ones. But the fighting men are going to do what? they're going to go into the land, okay? And they're going to stand right with their brothers, and they're going to fight against the Canaanite, Ammonite tribes that are in the land of Canaan, because that's what God told them, and they agreed to do that. That's their solution. In verses 16 through 19, that's exactly what it talks about. They're going to build the sheepfolds, they're going to build the houses, they're going to take care of their little ones, to take care of their wives, and they agree that they will go in and fight. And in verses 20 through 24, Moses agrees with this. Moses says, so Moses then said to them, if you will do this, if you will arm yourselves before the Lord for the war, and all of you, your armed men, cross over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven his enemies from before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then afterward you shall return and be free of obligation toward the Lord and toward Israel, and this land shall be yours for a possession before the Lord. However, verse 23, but if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. So the fear was that it was going to be like when they were at Kadesh, that they would go in, come back, and give a bad report, and then they would refuse to go in, the spies. And so that was, but again, the sons of Gad and Reuben in verses 25 through 27 confirm their commitment. This is what we're willing to do. This is what we want to do. This is the land we want to have, and we don't need a possession in the land of Jordan, because the land in the Transjordan area is perfect for our crops, or excuse me, for raising our livestock. So then in 28 through 30, this is what Moses tells Joshua and Eleazar. Why would he talk to Joshua and Eleazar? Joshua was going to lead them, and he was going to lead what? He was going to lead physically or spiritually? Was Joshua going to lead them physically or spiritually? He was going to, well, I don't know if he's going to lead them spiritually or not, maybe, but we know he's going to lead them physically, and the reason that Eleazar is there, who was Eleazar? He's the high priest, okay? So Moses is addressing the physical side and the spiritual side too. In addition to that, who else is there? The tribal leaders from all of the tribes are there. All of them are involved in this, okay? So, verse 28. So Moses gave command concerning them to Eleazar the priest and to Joshua the son of Nun and to the heads of the fathers of households of the tribes of Israel. Moses said to them, if the sons of Gad and Reuben, everyone who is armed for battle, will cross with you over to the Jordan in the presence of the Lord, and the land is subdued before you, then you shall give them the land, then you shall give them the land of Gilead for a possession. But if they will not cross over with you armed, they shall have possessions among you in the land of Canaan. What was the plus for the other 10.5 tribes if they gave 2.5 tribes their possession over there? Yeah. There's more for them. So, either way you look at this, this is a plus. They get the land that they want for their sheep and cattle, and the land of Canaan is split. There's a larger amount available to do the splitting. And then we see, once again, in 31 and 32, that Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh make this commitment. Again, this is what we're going to do. We said we would do this. We're going to do this. And then Moses, symbolically anyway, gives the former Amorite lands to Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh in verses 33 through 41. And then we see in that section, that overall section, look at verse 34, you see the area that the sons of Gad got. And in verse 37, the listing of what the sons of Reuben got. And then in verse 39, what the half-tribe of Manasseh got, each section. And the way it sits north to south, the northernmost tribe is the sons of is the half-tribe of Manasseh. Then it's the tribe of Reuben, and it's the tribe of Gad. It's just the opposite of the way they're listed in chapter 32, I'm sorry. And then in chapter 33, we get into an interesting summary. At least that's the way I kind of look at it. And let's look at the first two verses there of 33. These are the journeys of the sons of Israel. That is what we've been studying for the last, however long it's been, to get here, by which they came out from the land of Egypt by their armies under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Moses recorded their starting, note this, their starting places according to their journeys by the command of the Lord, and these are their journeys according to their starting places. That is, each time they moved, this is a place from which they moved to the next place. How many starting places are there? Anybody bother to count? 43. You got a better counter than me. I only counted 40. But either way, I mean, there's a significant number of places that they stopped. How long did they stop? Don't have any idea. They stopped some places for a very short period of time, apparently, and for other places, an extended period of time. We know that. It doesn't tell us. It's one of those things, wouldn't it be wonderful to know? And the answer is no, it really wouldn't be wonderful to know, because it doesn't matter one way or the other. The thing that's important is that they were obedient to God and they followed God. So we see in verses 3, they journeyed from Ramses. Ramses was where? It was in Egypt, okay? In the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, on the next day after the Passover, the sons of Israel started out boldly in the sight of all the Egyptians. While the Egyptians were burying all of their firstborn. When had the firstborn been killed? Just the previous day, if I read that correctly, okay? They struck down among them, and the Lord had also executed judgments on their God. How did God execute judgments on the gods of Egypt? I'm sorry? The plagues, okay. Every one of the plagues was designed to negate, be a slap in the face, whatever you want to call it, a put down to one of the gods with a small g of Egypt, to show that Jehovah, the God of Israel, was superior. Going down to verse 8, they journeyed from before Hahiroth and passed through the midst of the sea in the wilderness. And they went 3 days' journey into the wilderness of Etham, and they camped at Meribah. Marah. Okay, I'm going to get it wrong if I'm not careful. Marah. What happened at Marah? That's one of the things that's mentioned in the New Testament. The bitter water. That was the bitter water. How did God tell Moses to cure the bitter water? I'm sorry?
Drank the water with his staff.
I don't think so, but that may be true. That's not what I remember. Yeah, it was wasn't it a bush or a tree, a log, something that he threw into the water, and it turned it from being bitter to being fresh. Okay? But he did a lot of striking of water, you're right, with and then 9 through 10 of chapter 33, they traveled from Marah to Elim. Elim, is noted, it had 12 springs of water and 70 palms. And after what they had been through, that was pretty refreshing. And then from Elim, they camped by the Red Sea. Now, it sounds like they camped by the Red Sea They went out into the wilderness, and then they came back by the Red Sea. And then from there, in verses 11 through 14, we find out that they traveled into the wilderness of sin, okay? And they got to a place called Rephidim. What happened at Rephidim? They didn't have anything to drink. Okay? What else?
Yes, is that where Moses struck the rock?
That's where he struck the rock, okay? Not where he got in trouble, because some people get those confused. This is where God told him to do what? Strike the rock, and water was produced, and that's where that was. That was in Rephidim, okay? That's in Exodus 19. And then in verse 16, they journeyed from the wilderness of Sinai and camped at Kibroth Havata. What happened there? What were they complaining about at this point in time? You remember? God gave them so much that it came out their nose. That's why I always remember that one.
Quail.
That's where they got quail, okay? They were complaining about not having all the wonderful things that they had in Egypt. They'd forgotten all of the bad things they had in Egypt, but all they could complain about was all the wonderful things that they had in Egypt. So God gave them meat. In fact, more meat than they could do with. Okay? And then from there, we find out, as we look in verse 36, and they journeyed from Ezion Geber and camped in the wilderness of Zin, that is Kadesh. What happened to Kadesh? It's another place where they had a problem with what? What was the biggest problem that they had? Living in a desert. Water. Water was the biggest problem we had. And this is where our leader had a problem too. Their leader had a problem. Okay? This is the location that's known as the water of Meribah. And that's where Moses took the honor away from God, incorporated honor for himself in there, whatever, however you want to look at it, and that Moses ended up being cursed as a result of this and never went into the land of Canaan. Okay? And from Kadesh, they traveled to Mount Hor. Who died in Mount Hor? Aaron. Aaron died at Mount Hor, and he was taken yes, I can't think of the term that they use now. And then in verses 41 through 47 of chapter 33, they finally get where? The plains of Moab, okay? The plains of Moab, across the Jordan, on the east side, across the Jordan from where? Jericho, okay? Jericho, okay? And then in verses 50 through 56, God gives them some laws. He gives them 4 commandments and 2 prophecies relative to what's going to happen in the land. Then the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you cross over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, number 1, you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you." And they did that, right? No, they didn't. Okay? Number 2, and destroy all their figured stones, and destroy all their molten images, and destroy all their high places. They did that though, right? So there's 0 for 2 so far.
Yeah.
Verse 53, and you shall take possession of the land and live in it, for I have given the land to you to possess it. Well, he did that. Okay? And you shall inherit the land by lot according to your families. To the larger you shall give more inheritance, and to the smaller, excuse me, let me turn the page here, you shall give less inheritance. However, the lot falls to anyone, that shall be his. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. Okay? Verse 55 and 56 are somewhat ominous. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come about that those whom you let remain of them will become as pricks in your eyes and as thorns in your sides, and they will trouble you in the land in which you live. And worst of all, verse 56, and as I plan to do to them, so I will do to you. And that's exactly what God did. A little time in there, but that's exactly what God did. In chapter 34, we see the dimensions, or it describes the borders, and I'm not going to go into that because, perfectly honestly, only some of these places I know where they are, and if you really want to identify them, you need to get a map and look at it, and that's the best way. But it describes what the southern, then the western, then the northern, and then the eastern border. The only one that's really easy to understand is which border? Yes, the western border. The western border is the Mediterranean. Even simple me can understand that one.
On the eastern was Jordan, right?
No, sir. Look at verses 10 through 12 of chapter 34. That's the eastern border. For your eastern border, you shall also draw a line from Hazar Enan, if you know where it is, to Sepham, and the border shall go down. Anyway, it goes into it, to a description of the border. And there are a lot of people out there that think they know where they are, and they could be right. But the only one that I'm absolutely positive of is the western border. In verses 13 through 15, I think it's important to look at. So Moses commanded the sons of Israel, saying, this is the land that you are to apportion by lot among you as a possession, which the Lord has commanded to give to the 9.5 tribes. For the tribe of the sons of Reuben have received theirs according to their father's households, and the tribe of the sons of Gad according to their father's household, and the half tribe of Manasseh have received their possession. The 2.5 tribe has received their possession across the Jordan, opposite Jericho, eastward toward the sun rising. And then if we look at verses 16 through 29, okay, God selects the men who are going to do the apportioning of the land of Canaan. It's not selected, the men are not appointed by anybody other than God. And I think that's important to note. In verse 35 and 36, they talk about two interesting entities. One of them is the city of the Levites, cities of the Levites. How many cities of the Levites were there? I'm sorry? 40-something. Thank you. You got it in the right decade, or not a decade, but 10 count. Yeah, there were 48. 46 were also cities of refuge. All of the cities of refuge were also cities of the Levites. Okay? And then an additional 42 cities, besides those 6 cities of refuge, were also appointed to them. And basically, that's all chapter 35 talks about. Since we don't have any cities of refuge left, I'm not going to talk much about the cities of refuge, but I do want to talk about the law of refuge, which is in Numbers 35, verses 16 through 34. The difference between a murderer and a manslayer is significant to Jehovah. If it wasn't significant, he would not have given this law. And that's really all that this law talks about in verses 36, in chapter 35, verses 16 through 34. It's significant, and that's why he gave the law to Israel. Generally speaking, it's an issue of what? The difference between a murderer and a manslayer. Intent. Okay? How about today? It really hasn't changed. Okay? It's really the same thing. Did you intend to do that? Well, if you didn't intend to do that, if it was an accident that made you what? A manslayer, okay? We call it manslaughter, okay, today in this country, okay? But the problem with the Jews was, how was a murderer to be taken care of? Okay, what was always the punishment for murder? What happened to the murderer? The murderer died, period. There are no exceptions to that rule. Now, you can argue with me all you want, as I've told other classes from time to time, but your argument is not with me if you don't agree with the death penalty. Your argument is with God. Well, does that mean man's infallible? No, absolutely not. Okay, we make mistakes. Isn't it fortunate that we're going to be judged by God who does not make mistakes? If any of you are crazy enough to want to be judged by me, let me assure you that's not a good decision. Okay? I'm human and I make lots of mistakes. And I won't tell you who. There's at least 2 people in this audience that can give you some firsthand information. Well, no, actually, there's 3 that can, but we won't go into that right now. The bottom line is the city of refuge was designed to protect the manslayer who had slain somebody accidentally, okay, without the intent to harm the individual, and they could be safe from the blood avenger. Because the blood avenger had the God-given right, okay, to kill anybody that was a murderer. And if you were not adjudged a manslayer, and even if you were adjudged a manslayer, you had to stay in the city of refuge, not go home until what happened? You guys missed that. The high priest died. As long as the same high priest was in the office of high priest, I'm going to sneak out of the city of refuge and no one will catch me. Well, if you do and you get caught by the bloodslayer, he could kill you. The blood avenger could kill you and not have any responsibility for that, because that was his job. The latter part of chapter 36, which we're not going to talk about, okay, we covered when we dealt with chapter 27, and it's the inheritance for women. It has nothing to do with not wanting to talk about it again. Basically, what it comes down to is the fact that God decided how the lot was going to be spread for each family, and he wanted the properties to remain in the same tribe. So if you as a woman had no male heirs and you received a allotment of land in the land of Israel, the only way you could accept that was if you married a man from your own tribe. And then at the Jubilee, what happened on Jubilee to property? It reverted to the original owners, okay? And if you had allowed a woman to marry a man from a different tribe, okay, since the owning of property was through the mail, that's how it was tracked, then that property would move over to a different tribe, and God did not want, and specifically talks about that in chapter 36 and in chapter 27, so that would not happen. Any questions that I can't answer about the entire book of Numbers? because that's the last chapter in the book of Numbers. Next week, Kevin is going to teach the class in Deuteronomy, and then he's going to take off for a week and party, and so you get me back again for a week, I think, and then Kevin will be back and teach the remainder of the book. Any other thoughts or questions? Hey, I got done early. All right.